you had three wishes, what would they be?
Yeah, first one, the roof on my head, and money to get by on, and just like get cleaned up, start going back to church.
How long have you been sleeping outside for?
10 years.
10 years.
In the shadow of Chugach's towering peaks, where the wind screams like a solitary wolf through Anchorage's streets, people are braving a winter that's already taken too many lives.
If I die, I die. It don't matter, you know.
By late November 2025, the homeless count in Anchorage alone had reached at least 2,965, reflecting a staggering increase of more than 600 individuals, or 256.7% since 2019. Alaska is a place where the weather can dictate life or death, and yet more and more people are left to fend for themselves without even a door to shut at night.
But now I don't even know I do like the big stuff on work. Take 5 weeks to get a birth certificate. After all that, out of Minnesota.
In a state this frigid, lacking shelter isn't just tough, it's perilous in ways that many Americans in the lower 48 can hardly imagine. With a sparse population of around 733,000 spread across its vast landscape, Alaska's homelessness rate stands at nearly 40 per 10,000, significantly higher than the national average of 22.7, according to the latest HUD data. This crisis isn't a distant issue. It's eating away at the very fabric of our communities. Public health is suffering, with emergency rooms overflowing with frostbite victims and untreated injuries, and EMS teams pushed to the brink. Alaska is facing a deepening public health emergency. Substance-related deaths are on the rise, surpassing national averages, and Alaska Native individuals, who make up just 15% of the population, now represent about 44% of the state's homeless population. This tragedy is about more than just economic hardship or harsh weather. It's rooted in a history of inequality, unresolved trauma, and long-standing social wounds.
What's it like being homeless here in Alaska?
It sucks. I don't like it. I want to go back home.
Then there's a proposed law to criminalize sleeping outside, with fines up to $2,000 or 6 months in jail, igniting protests from the ACLU, which called it inhumane in a state that's already a freezer. So, why in one of the wealthiest countries in the world are thousands of people struggling to survive an Alaska winter with no shelter to return to? And what does this say about us? Is it a failure of policy or a moral failure that reveals something uncomfortable about who we are? As we delve deeper into Alaska's situation, I don't want us to just focus on statistics. I want us to confront an uncomfortable reality. In America's far north, homelessness is no longer a fringe issue. It's a critical test of how much we truly value human life. The escalating homelessness crisis, root causes, and far-reaching consequences. Recent statistics have confirmed what many in Alaska have known for some time. The surge in homelessness is not just a perception. It's tangible, quantifiable, and becoming increasingly impossible to overlook. In the latest point-in-time count, Anchorage saw a 54% rise in homelessness compared to 2019, with over 2,600 individuals recorded on one cold January night alone. And this is just a glimpse. Throughout the year, data shows that more than 3,000 people in the city cycle through tents, RVS, temporary shelters, and a housing waitlist that seems to move at a glacial pace. Statewide, federal reports indicate that about 18% of Alaska's homeless population resides in places not intended for human habitation, while the rest crowd into shelters that are consistently overwhelmed.
But I just got the good job and I'm homeless, and so I'm staying here at the shelter to try to get shelter there and try to get them to help me get on housing, low-income housing, to get me a spot.
Since 2019, emergency beds across the state have doubled to more than 1,000, but they are still stretched to capacity, turning away countless individuals who simply need a dry spot to sleep. EMS teams and law enforcement, they're stretched thin, constantly transporting people from freezing camps to emergency rooms or sobering stations, with call volumes increasing 32% in recent years, further draining budgets that could address the root causes of the crisis. In the dead of night, when temperatures dip to 20 below, those without shelter huddle together against the wind, their breath the only warmth. It's deeply unsettling, isn't it, that we've come to accept this slow-moving disaster as the new normal? Part of the explanation lies in the economy and the housing market. Rents have skyrocketed, but affordable housing hasn't kept pace. Over 1,000 Anchorage households are now at risk of losing their homes because their rent exceeds what they can afford. People have lost jobs overnight, wages have stagnated, and rents for a two-bedroom apartment have climbed to $1,368 a month, requiring a household income of $55,000 just to stay afloat. Add Alaska's extreme climate, high construction costs, and an unpredictable labor market, and it's no wonder housing development has come to a near standstill. For many, a single blow, be it job loss, illness, or divorce, can be all it takes to push them into homelessness. The ripple effects are swift. When shelters are full, people stay longer, which leads to fewer openings and less opportunity for anyone to transition into permanent housing. Emergency services, law enforcement, and nonprofits end up dealing with crises daily, rather than having the resources to prevent them in the first place. Across the nation, the story is similar. In 2024 alone, the number of people served by homelessness programs rose by about 12%, signaling a sharp increase in need rather than a decline. And the cost? Our 2026 budget allocates $27 million to address this issue, but we're facing a $61 million deficit by the end of the decade, funds poured into short-term solutions rather than long-term strategies. We have oil wealth flowing elsewhere, yet we're skimping on support for the most vulnerable. Call me old-fashioned, but isn't that the true scandal? Letting pride and politics freeze out our fellow citizens while the rest of us sip coffee and warmth? It's enough to make anyone stop and reflect on what we've become. Clearing camps and island relocation, temporary fix or perpetual cycle. When Anchorage dismantled its two largest camps in Mountain View last summer, the city hailed it as progress. More than 100 people were displaced from Davis Park and the nearby snow dump, and crews removed hundreds of tons of trash, needles, and abandoned vehicles. On the surface, it seemed like a victory. As the mayor put it, Davis Park was getting a fresh start after workers cleared roughly 750,000 pounds of debris. But if you walk through the area now, you can't help but ask a more difficult question. Did Anchorage actually solve a problem, or just shift it to another part of the city? Under Mayor Suzanne LaFrance, the city has relied heavily on abatement, the formal term for camp clearances. Since taking office, the administration claims to have cleared over 24 encampments, cleaned more than 1 million pounds of trash, and coordinated efforts across 8 city departments for this work. The public message is clear. Parks and trails are for everyone, and it's unfair for any one group to occupy them for too long. For many longtime residents in Mountain View, being able to let their kids play disc golf or use the ball fields again feels like reclaiming basic dignity. But here's the uncomfortable reality. 6 weeks after the major sweeps, many unhoused individuals were still in the vicinity, only now dispersed rather than concentrated in the woods. They stood by store entrances, walked through alleyways, or gathered in smaller parks. Now, police and outreach teams must divide their resources, responding to scattered groups rather than focusing on one location, while the homeless are forced away from the support systems they previously depended on. At the same time, the city pushed for new regulations imposing criminal penalties for camping on public land, following the Supreme Court's decision to relax restrictions on camp removals. I can understand the frustration of residents who see parks overtaken, trash accumulating, and violence surrounding encampments. But I also can't ignore a simple truth. Each time we clean up a camp without providing enough shelter beds, housing, and treatment, we're not reducing homelessness. We're simply making the people living through it less visible to the rest of society. So, is this really a public safety measure, or just a way to ease our discomfort while a crisis continues right before our eyes? Housing crisis in Alaska. The 3,000-person waitlist and its ripple effects. The housing crisis in Alaska is no longer a distant concern. It's here, and it's visible in the form of over 3,000 people in Anchorage waiting for stable housing. People desperate to escape homelessness, but trapped in a system that moves at a pace so slow it feels almost paralyzed. When we see that number, we have to ask ourselves, how does a resource-rich city like Anchorage allow so many people to languish on a waiting list, losing hope as time passes? Recent data from Alaska Public Media shows that the housing waitlist has barely budged over the past year. The bottleneck is caused by a combination of rising labor costs, shortages in building materials, and long winters that delay construction plans, factors that have a stranglehold on the Alaska housing market. This creates a system where people in makeshift camps, old RVs, or crowded shelters are forced to wait indefinitely for a solution. Several individuals have told me they feel as though they're standing outside a locked door, hearing life go on inside, but never being allowed entry. Can we really call that a humane system? As the waitlist stagnates, the consequences ripple through the community. Shelters are forced to extend stays, nonprofit outreach programs are overwhelmed, and caseworkers are exhausted because they can't secure even temporary housing for their clients. The tragic reality is that this cycle pushes many into what experts term chronic homelessness, a condition that's much harder to escape than the initial stages of instability. Amid the growing homelessness issue in Anchorage, even well-meaning charitable efforts can feel like trying to bail water from a sinking ship. Some individuals have even resorted to setting up Alaska hot tents in the forests surrounding Anchorage as a temporary solution, fully aware that it's unsafe, unsustainable, and entirely incompatible with the harsh Alaska winter. But with no better alternatives, they take the risk. When we zoom out and view the bigger picture, it becomes painfully evident that the housing crisis doesn't just create a list of 3,000 people waiting for help. It triggers a chain reaction that destabilizes the entire social support system, placing immense pressure on people who already carry heavy burdens. And it forces Alaska to confront its toughest question when it comes to homelessness. Can a state with winters this brutal continue to allow so many people to live without a roof over their heads? This isn't just a policy issue. It's a moral test of our compassion and our responsibility to one another as a community. Legalizing sleeping on the streets. The risks of criminalizing homelessness. Criminalizing the act of sleeping outside is drawing Alaska into a deeper debate about policy, justice, and compassion. The latest proposal in Anchorage, where homelessness continues to rise according to 2025 data, would impose fines and even jail sentences of up to 6 months for anyone found sleeping in public spaces without an approved shelter option. At first glance, it seems like a straightforward urban management solution. But when we look more closely, it raises a much more fundamental question. How can we punish someone for not having a place to call home? More importantly, will dragging them into the criminal justice system help them regain stability, or simply make it even harder for them to rebuild their lives? The ACLU of Alaska has strongly opposed this proposal, calling it inhumane, particularly as the city continues to clear homeless camps and conduct cleanup efforts without providing adequate alternative shelters. This leaves Anchorage's homeless population constantly moving between parks, sidewalks, and the edges of neighborhoods, trapped in a cycle that increases their vulnerability, especially during the freezing winter nights. Adding to this, receiving a citation, or worse, acquiring a minor criminal record becomes a significant barrier. It makes finding a job, renting a home, and reclaiming any semblance of stability even more difficult. To be honest, I don't believe that criminalizing poverty has ever made a community stronger. Are we really addressing the problem? Or are we merely pushing Alaska's most vulnerable citizens further away from the support they so desperately need? And on the coldest nights of the year, we must confront the ultimate question. What good is a punishment when the real thing they lack isn't discipline, but a warm roof that could keep them alive until the morning? Tiny homes, a step towards solution, or just a small part of the bigger picture? Tiny homes are making their way across Anchorage, offering a potential lifeline for those who've spent too many cold nights outside. While they may not be the perfect solution many hoped for, it's hard to ignore the significance they hold for people who have been homeless for far too long. According to updates from November, Anchorage's new tiny home village, partially funded by a settlement related to opioid issues, is set to welcome its first residents, many of whom need stable shelter to continue their recovery from opioid addiction, or are older adults who simply cannot endure another harsh Alaska winter outside. To be honest, even though these units are only slightly larger than a small bedroom, they mean the world to someone who has spent years sleeping on the streets. But when we take a closer look, we have to ask, Can a few dozen units really make a difference for the more than 3,000 people waiting for permanent housing? And if the city views this model as a lifeline, what happens when the next winter comes and the waitlist is still stagnant? These are the questions that keep running through my mind every time I hear people talk about Anchorage's future. I do understand why tiny homes inspire hope. They offer unhoused individuals a stable enough space to access healthcare, harm reduction services, or even just a warm bed instead of a tent in minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit weather. But honestly, this model remains just a small piece of the puzzle, without strong government support behind it. And that's where the controversy lies. Are we building real hope, or simply layering another temporary solution over a problem that continues to grow beneath the surface? Conclusion: Alaska at a crossroads. Crisis or opportunity for reform? Alaska has reached a tipping point where half measures no longer suffice. With new data showing over 3,000 people still on the housing waitlist in Anchorage, and the number of people sleeping outside continuing to rise as winter temperatures plunge to minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, this is no longer just a routine urban management issue. It's a matter of survival, a test of how a community responds to conditions harsher than anywhere else in the country, a reality constantly highlighted in every Alaska homeless documentary that seeks to capture the truth on the ground. And then comes the hardest question. How much longer can we treat homelessness as a temporary crisis when all evidence points to it having become a permanent part of life here? The new tiny home projects are promising, yes, but with only a few dozen units available against a need in the thousands, they feel more like a fragile flicker of light rather than a comprehensive solution. The ongoing debates about unclear budgeting and proposals to criminalize outdoor sleeping have only made the issue more uncomfortable and far more divisive. Still, despite all this tension, I believe Alaska has a genuine opportunity to turn the page. Because if not now, when? And if not us, those witnessing this unfold firsthand, then who will take responsibility for breaking a cycle that has persisted for far too long? Ultimately, what Alaska needs is not just more shelter beds, but a clear, humane, and long-term vision. A vision bold enough to transform today's crisis into the foundation for tomorrow's recovery. That choice remains in our hands, but time is quickly running out.